I mean, the big story obviously has been the falling price of oil. And I've been trying to keep track of what impact that is going to have on Alberta and on investment in Alberta and in Canada. It seems to be a moving target, so I'm wondering if you could maybe just bring us up to date first with what you see the impact is as of right now.
Well, certainly, and there are significant impacts, and I mean, we're sanguine about it as Albertans. We've been through price troughs before, and we will be tough and resilient and get through this. But there are implications. Clearly, people in my province understand that the Premier of Alberta cannot control the international price of oil, and even projection of oil prices is a mug's game. But there are things we can control, and they're twofold. Firstly, the desire on the part of our province to secure export capacity to achieve global prices at least by accessing global markets. And so that will remain a driving imperative on the part of our government. But secondly is our public finances, and to insist on discipline and prudence in the face of a pretty significant decline in terms of the revenue base of the government. We receive about 25% of our revenues at present from oil, actually. And so for every dollar that the price of oil drops, we lose over $200 million of revenue. And so the audience here is more able to do that math than me. But the implications are multi-billion in size. And so it's a time for discipline in public expenditures. We will balance the budget this year, concluding in March, and we have every intention of budgeting it next year as well.
Okay. We'll get to pipelines in a minute, but I want to ask you a bit more about how the impact on your budgeting process. I saw that in the throne speech, there was some mention of trying to sort of untie the government revenues from volatile oil prices. And I think your finance minister mentioned something about trying to get off the oil train as well. And I was curious as what sort of options you were considering that you would be able to do that. This is a little bit different than you're getting fewer revenues, but you're also trying to stop those wild swings in revenues.
Well, it has for many years, but in particular the last decade, been a bit of a roller coaster in terms of my province's public finances. In good years, when oil prices are high, we're booking extraordinary surpluses. When oil prices decline, it becomes a real struggle. And our finance minister made it the point most graphically when he said, we can't be watching OPEC meetings to decide how many schools we're building or how many nurses we're going to have in hospitals. And that's essentially where we found ourselves. And so what's the answer? The answer is pretty straightforward. We need more discipline in the budgeting process, and we need to build in a lower price of oil, which happily or unhappily is where we currently are in terms of what we would expect in that portion of our revenues, and then go from there. And so we're advocating some fairly significant changes in terms of the budgeting process that we're now just beginning.
Would putting more of that money aside in the vehicles like the Heritage Fund be one of the options you might be looking at? Well,
Albertans feel very strongly about the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. It presently has about $15 billion in it. It aggregates at the rate of about $1 billion to $1.5 billion per year. The bigger challenges that we have in Alberta right now relates to our growth. There is actually no one in North America that is coping with the growth that we are in our province and the need for social infrastructure arising from that. We have, for example, 230 schools in various stages of design, construction, and commissioning right now. It's the biggest build-out of school infrastructure in Canadian history. Hospitals, the same, senior citizen facilities. And it's just the consequence of a province that is experiencing growth rates year after year that are unexcelled anywhere in North America. That's our challenge.
I'll play devil's advocate a bit here. Would the lower price of oil actually help you in the respect that it will actually dampen growth, particularly in the oil sands and the cost and labor inflation that has come along with that? Is there a silver lining in this lower oil price?
Well, there may be, but here's the worst of it, as economists explain it to me. much of the capital investment that we have in Alberta is in the oil sands. It's by its very nature lumpy. These are 50-year investments that are being made, and consequently they will carry forward on a momentum of their own, notwithstanding lower prices. And so we will experience, in some respects, double challenges of falling revenue, but growth rates that continue. To be sure, there will be a decline. If the price trough persists, there will be a decline in conventional drilling activity. That I think not just Alberta, but everyone else will begin to see, probably this coming spring.
Right.
But as we say, there's nothing to solve low prices like low prices, and so, the markets will achieve equilibrium.
Pipelines, I said I would get back
Right.
to it. It seems like everywhere the industry turns, the pipeline access is facing obstacles. If you were a betting man, which of these pipelines, and I'm thinking about Northern Gateway, Keystone, Energy East, or even the Arctic, which is actually going to come to fruition?
Well, I'm not a betting man, but I did win a bet with Premier Wynne. She had to wear the Calgary Stampeders jersey this morning with the media. What Alberta needs, what Canada needs, I would submit, is pipelines in every direction. And certainly the Keystone pipeline with the United States is important. We can speak about that. The pipeline that I've been here discussing with the Premier of Quebec yesterday and the Premier of Ontario today, the Energy East project is extremely important, and I think it likely represents the most immediate opportunity in terms of our capacity to access tidewater. To be sure, projects to the west are also very important because we really maximize our competitive advantage as a province, achieving access to tidewater off of the west coast of Canada, because the quantum of oil that we can export into the Asia-Pacific basin is enormous. And of course, the incremental demand is really there. But having said that, the U.S. market is important to us, and we need to see this Keystone discussion through. We can speak about that. And so all of the pipelines are important. I remain an optimist. I am strained at that some days, but the last couple of days have been very good. And I see in Premier Wynne and certainly in the discussions that I had with Premier Couillard aussi, an opportunity to work together in a way that makes the country stronger with these projects.
Okay, I've got one last question. It's a bit of a shift of gears, and then I'll open to the audience. And that is the U.S.-China Climate Accord, which seemed to come out of the blue to a lot of people. But I'm wondering, long-term, how you see that impacting on Alberta and the oil industry there. I'm thinking in particular whether there's going to be more pressure for Canada to come up with different climate regulations or a carbon tax, which I know you don't like, but do you see an impact from it?
Well, certainly, and there's a number of aspects to that question. I mean, Alberta has an industrial price on carbon now that is often overlooked, and there's a great discussion about whether it's sufficient or not, but it's actually more than almost anyone else does. And so we can come back to what Alberta does and the need for improvement. There clearly is a need for improvement, and I'm very focused on that. The agreement that the Chinese and the Americans have reached it's largely an expression of intent. Mm-hmm. As I recall, the Chinese have agreed for the first time, I don't downplay the importance of this, they've agreed to reduce emissions post-2030. It's the first time they've ever said that, so I take that seriously. And the United States has simply agreed that they will achieve reductions of 26% by a later date than they had put forward at Copenhagen, I think extending it to 2025 or 2030. So, I mean, these are, they're an expression of direction, which are important, and we have every intention of fulfilling our share of the responsibility. And I want my province to be an energy leader, but I also want my province to distinguish itself as an environmental leader. And that includes monitoring, it includes international partnerships, it includes not just greenhouse gas emissions, but the use of protection of airsheds and watersheds. And I actually think that's part of the genius of Canada, is an ability to balance resource development with environmental protection.
Okay.
So I'm not intimidated by that, but
No.
there is work to be done.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to leave it to the audience to actually press you a little bit further on this. Are there questions in the audience? Anyone? Yes, please, the gentleman here. I think there is a roving microphone that will get to you shortly. Thank you.
It's wonderful to be here with such a distinguished audience. So.
Prentice. I am an old pipeliner and been in business for 35 years in pipeline business, and I live in Calgary. The more, the merrier, the pipelines. But if I was a betting man, I would bet on the Energy East. But under the scenario of the no pipeline, or maybe one pipeline, existing ones, proposed, and I said proposed ones, what is under that scenario? If there was no pipeline, what would for Alberta, what for Canada?
Oh, well, I mean, I don't believe that there is a scenario by which there will be no pipeline. But let me just quantify the economic cost today of Alberta Energy not accessing Tidewater. If you take the last fiscal year, the numbers from our Department of Energy are that the lost revenue to energy companies was $10.85 billion per year. These are not GDP numbers. This is out-of-pocket revenue by not achieving global prices. If you translate that back into royalties, it means that my province forgave $3 billion in royalties. It means the federal government forgave $2 billion in income tax, and my province forgave $1 billion in income tax. So this is $6 billion per annum, roughly, direct cost to the governments of Canada and Alberta. And I'm not talking GDP numbers and those sort of projections. And so I don't think that's a tenable option going forward. I don't think that's a tenable alternative for a country that is as wealthy and sophisticated as ours. And so I believe that we will get these pipelines built. I'm an optimist. I think actually that we are going to see progress with the United States, as the Obama presidency nears its conclusion. There's a great deal of bipartisan support building for Keystone. And there's also a lot of bipartisan support developing around the notion that we have built together the largest integrated energy market systems in the world. And they've driven prosperity on both sides of the border, and we should get back to focusing on what's in our collective best interest. So I'm optimistic about our relationship with the US. And I also think that we will make the Energy East project work, and I'm quite optimistic in the intermediate term about the West Coast. And Premier Clark and I have struck a strong partnership.
Okay. Thank you. Another question? What do you? Oh.
Danny Asaf, Tories. Premier, my question is about foreign direct investment. It came up earlier today. And of course, you having held the post and administered the Investment Canada Act as the Minister of Industry, today is the Premier of Alberta, with this continued need, obviously, for foreign direct investment to develop things like the oil sands, and this policy of the current government of, in certain circumstances, only allowing that foreign direct investment in exceptional circumstances. How do you see kind of squaring that circle in your new role?
Well, we'll continue to work with the federal government, and I do support the net benefit test that we have in the Investment Canada Act. And I was involved in some reforms of that when I was Canada's industry minister. Over the course of first let me say we cannot develop the energy resources in Alberta without access to foreign capital. I think if you look at the statistics, historically about a third of the capital that we need for the energy sector is raised domestically, and the rest is derived from a number of foreign sources, including over the last 10 years, close to $65 billion invested by Chinese state-owned enterprises. I'm supportive of the steps that were taken to, in a sense, ring-fence majority control of large stakes in the Canadian oil sands, but we still must be open for foreign investment. And I'm on the record as being one that advocates a regime that will attract investment, including the investment of state-owned enterprises, to Canada, because I see a willingness from my time as a banker, I see a willingness on the part of foreign governments to locate that capital in democratic countries, and I would prefer to see those jobs, frankly, in Calgary as opposed to Houston or London, England, or somewhere else. And so I know that there are international state-owned vehicles that want to platform their businesses in a democracy such as Canada, and I think we should try to find solutions to make that happen. I think it will be good for us as a country.